Even scarred cowboys need love, said the Cheyenne woman after he shielded her from the bullet. The bullet went in just below my left shoulder blade, angled toward the spine, and what I remember most about the moment is not the pain that came later, a whole cathedral of it, but the sound. Like someone snapping a green branch off a live tree. Wet. Final. And then the ground came up and hit me in the face. I'd been alive long enough to know the difference between a crease and a keeper. This was a keeper. She was beside me before I could roll over. I know because I could feel her hands already pressing on my back, flat-palmed and hard, and she was saying something I couldn't make sense of yet. Some of it was in English. Some wasn't. Her name was Walks Far. That's what she told me later. Her people's name for her anyway, which was the only name that ever fit. But I'm getting ahead of myself. That's what old men do. We circle the wound and come at it sideways. My name is Callum Holt. I was 53 years old the summer this happened, and I had been hired, along with 6 other men of varying usefulness, to stand between a farming town called Cutter's Crossing and the man who meant to take everything in it. His name was Darrow Jessup. He had a private army of somewhere between 40 and 60 guns. Nobody ever got an accurate count, and he had been bleeding that valley dry for 3 years before anyone got desperate enough to hire the likes of me. I won't tell you I was the best of the 7. I was maybe the most thorough. The difference matters. The best men among us were faster, brighter, maybe more principled. I was the one who stayed at the problem longest. When something needed to be done quietly and without glory, I did it and walked away. That had been my life for going on 30 years. I had a face that showed it. A scar ran from my right ear to the corner of my jaw, a cavalry saber, Kansas, long before the war was formally concluded. My hands were rope-scarred and fire-scarred and gunmetal-scarred. I wasn't a handsome man, and I hadn't tried to be one for so long that I'd stopped noticing the way people looked past me. You get to a certain age and a certain condition, and people stop seeing you. They see the shape of what you are, decide what kind of use you might be, and look past the rest. I'd made my peace with that, or told myself I had. I'll tell you what that kind of peace actually looks like, in case you think it's a settled thing. It looks like eating supper alone every night and being fine with it. It looks like taking the far bunk in a bunkhouse, so nobody has to decide whether to talk to you. It looks like knowing which saloons will serve a scarred man without the particular expression that's worse than refusal and going only to those. It looks like being very good at your work, the actual mechanics of it, the observation and the timing and the knowing where to be before trouble arrives, and not asking for anything more than the pay and the horse and the road. I had killed men, which is a fact I carry the same way I carry the scar. Not with pride and not with guilt. In the way preachers describe guilt, more like a weight that's been there so long you've calibrated yourself to it. You don't forget. You just stop letting it be the first thing in the room. I was good at what I did, and I knew it, and nobody had taken that from me. That was what I had. We rode into Cutter's Crossing on a Tuesday morning. The town was the kind of frightened that has gone so long, it starts to resemble calm. Stores still open, women still hanging washing, but the eyes were wrong. Too still. The way a horse's eyes go still when it's past spooked, and just waiting for the thing to happen. The man who'd hired us, a farmer named Eddard Tull, met us at the edge of town and walked us to the livery. He was a big man who'd been made smaller by worry, the way worry does to men who can't outrun it. He talked too fast and repeated himself, and I let him talk, watching the streets the whole time. A man who has been watching strangers his whole life can read a town in the time it takes to ride from the edge to the center. I saw 3 men on porches who weren't sitting the way men sit when they're resting. I saw a woman hurry a child inside when she saw us come. I saw the way the street emptied just slightly, the way a body of water levels out when something large enters it. Jessup owned this town already in every way that mattered. He just hadn't taken the deed. There was a camp outside of town Cheyenne, maybe 8 or 10 families set back from the creek in the cottonwoods. I noticed it because camps like that don't usually sit so close to a town where they're not welcome, which generally means they've nowhere else to go, or something's holding them there. I filed it away. The first 3 days were planning and walking the ground, and letting Jessup know, in the quiet way these things get communicated, that the town had hired some teeth. He sent men to look at us. We let ourselves be looked at. It was a negotiation, same as any other, except the final argument would be made in lead. I met Walks Far on the second day. She was at the well at the edge of the camp, drawing water. She wasn't young, I'd put her near 40, maybe a few years either side, and she carried herself the way some women do, who've been through enough that they stopped needing the approval of strangers. Straight-backed. Not performing anything. I had approached to ask if anyone in the camp had seen Jessup's riders moving in the eastern tree line. It was a practical question, and I asked it plainly, the way I'd ask anyone. A lot of men would have ridden past that camp without a second thought, or approached it with the kind of condescension that makes everyone in earshot tired. I just asked the question. She answered it. Directly, without ceremony. 3 riders, eastern tree line, yesterday just before sundown, moving north. She'd watched them, because she watched everything. I thanked her and turned to go. She said, "You move like a man who knows where trouble is going to come from." I turned back. "I've been wrong before." "Not often," she said. It wasn't a compliment exactly. More like an observation of fact. I asked her name. She told me. She asked mine and I told her. That was all. I rode back to town, but I kept thinking about the way she'd said it. Not often. Like she'd already taken the measure of me and arrived somewhere and was just letting me know where she'd landed. Over the next 5 days, I found reasons to come back to the camp. I told myself they were tactical reasons, and some of them were the camp sat on high ground with a clear view of 3 approach roads, and the Cheyenne in it had been watching Jessup's movements for weeks, which was information worth having. But after the second visit, I stopped lying to myself. She fed me once. Fry bread and dried meat, sitting outside her fire in the early morning, while the light was still thin and blue. We didn't talk much. She asked how I'd gotten the scar on my jaw, and I told her. She didn't flinch, and she didn't look away, and she didn't offer that particular sympathy people give a disfigured man, which is really just discomfort they're handing back to you, wrapped in kindness. She just nodded, once, like it was information that fit somewhere in what she already understood. I asked her why her camp was still here, this close to a town that had been Jessup's for 3 years. She was quiet long enough that I thought she wasn't going to answer. Then she said her mother was ill, too ill to move, and they were waiting for her to either recover or go. And until then, the camp stayed. "And Jessup's men leave you alone?" She looked at me steadily. "Jessup's men leave us alone because we have nothing they want. When that changes, they won't." The way she said it, not bitter, not resigned, just clear, put a stone in my chest that sat there for the rest of the day. The fight came on a Thursday. Jessup had decided he was done waiting. He came in from 3 sides at dawn, 61 men as it turned out, which is more than I had projected, and I want to be honest about that. We held the main street, and the mill, and the north road, but the east flank got ragged early, and there was a period of maybe 40 minutes that I don't remember perfectly, because I was operating on something older and faster than thought. What I know is this. Somewhere in the second hour, in the ground between the last buildings on the south end and the creek, I saw 2 of Jessup's men break off from the main fight and move toward the Cottonwood camp. They weren't moving that way by accident. I had maybe 200 yards on them and a horse that was already blown and 4 rounds left in my pistol. I pushed the horse anyway. I got there ahead of them, barely, and came off the horse at the run, and there she was. Walks Far, standing outside her mother's tent, not running, watching the riders come with that same still watchfulness she had for everything. I put myself between her and them. One of them got a shot off before I could close the distance. That's the Green Branch sound. That's the ground coming up. I woke on my side in her tent, and the pain was a whole climate. My shirt was gone. Something was packed tight against my back, poultice of some kind, herb smell, mud, and something else I couldn't name. Walks Far was sitting cross-legged 3 feet away, watching me, and for a second I didn't know if I was alive, or if this was some version of what came after. "You're not dead," she said. "Not yet." "Not yet," she agreed. I tried to sit up, and she put her hand flat on my chest and pressed me back. and it was not a gentle press. It was firm and non-negotiable, and I lay back, because I'm not a fool. "The fight," I said. "Finished." A pause. "Your people held." I asked about the two riders. She told me, without any particular expression, that they had been handled. I looked at her, and I did not ask how, because I already understood what kind of woman would stand in front of her mother's tent and not run. "You should have run," I said, which wasn't the same thing as asking her to. "Should have," she said. She got up and added something to a small pot over the fire, moving efficiently, unhurried. Her mother was asleep behind a partition of hide. The tent was ordered, spare, everything in its place. I lay on my side and watched the smoke find the hole at the top and drift through. "How bad?" I asked, meaning the wound. "Bad enough that you will not ride tomorrow." "Day after?" She looked at me over her shoulder. "You can try." There was something in the way she said it, a kind of dry acknowledgement of who she was dealing with. A man who would try to ride in 2 days whether it was sensible or not, that made me almost smile, which pulled at the wound and I stopped. I stayed 4 days. My 6 hired partners came by in shifts. Most of them stayed 15 minutes, said what needed to be said, and left, the way men do when injury makes them uncomfortable. The youngest of us, a boy named Cass who couldn't have been more than 25, stayed longest and talked the most, and I could see him watching Walks Far when he thought nobody noticed. Not in a bad way. In the way young men look at capable women, something between admiration and an education they didn't know they needed. Tull came and shook my hand and said the town owed me. It was genuine. I thanked him and meant it, and that was about the total of what needed to be said. The others who came, some of the townspeople, a minister, the woman who ran the dry goods, most of them didn't come inside the tent. They stopped at the edge and looked in. I noticed that. Walks Far noticed it too, and said nothing about it, which told me she'd been noticing that kind of thing for a long time. On the second night, I couldn't sleep for the pain, and I lay in the dark listening to the creek and her mother's breathing and the ordinary sounds of the camp settling into night. After a while I became aware that Walks Far was awake too, sitting at the fire, which had gone to low coals. I said, "Why are you still up?" "Listening." "For what?" A pause. "I'm not sure yet." I understood that. It's the kind of listening you do when something in you is on alert and you don't know quite why. I'd done that for 30 years. I said, "You can sleep. I'll listen." She turned and looked at me across the coals. Her face was half lit, and the expression on it was not quite what I expected. Something considering. "You would," she said. "I'd consider it paying rent." She didn't smile, but something in the set of her face shifted. She went back to looking at the coals. After a while she lay down, and I lay on my side in the dark, and kept the kind of watch you can keep without moving, just tracking the sounds, and somewhere in that I felt something in my chest that I hadn't felt in a long time. Not desire, exactly. Or not only that. Something more like the feeling of being in the right place. I had forgotten that feeling. Or, not forgotten, just stopped expecting it. On the 3rd day her mother was worse. I watched Walks Far move through that morning with a stillness that was different from her ordinary stillness. This one had edges. I knew better than to talk when there was nothing useful to say, so I didn't. I lay on my side and did what I could, which was small, keeping the fire, a thing I could do without standing fully upright and staying out of the way of her work. Sometime in the early afternoon her mother called for her. She went inside and was in there a long time. I heard her mother's voice, low and steady, and then silence, and then Walks Far's voice the first time I'd heard her speak her own language, and there was something in the sound of it, the rhythm of it, that was entirely different from anything I'd heard from her in English. Softer. Older. Like a part of her that she kept somewhere deep was coming out through a door that didn't open often. She came out after a while and stood in the door of the tent and looked at the creek for a long time. I did not say anything. After a while she sat down near the fire. I eased myself up onto my elbow, which was still more than my body approved of, but I did it anyway, and I said, "Is there anything she needs that I could get?" "No." "Is there anything you need?" She looked at me. It was the kind of look that goes through whatever you've put up in front of yourself. Long enough that I thought about looking away and then didn't, because there wasn't anything in me that needed hiding. Not right now, she said. And then, after a moment, ask me again later. Her mother died on the fourth morning, just before light, with Walksfar's hand on her face. I know because I was awake, and I heard the exact quality of the silence change. Those who have been near enough to a death know the difference. One kind of silence is just quiet. The other is an absence. I lay still and said nothing. I knew she needed to be in that first hour without interference. Some griefs don't want company. They want space and time and maybe the small, meaningless sounds of the world continuing the creak, the birds starting their first calls in the gray light, a horse shifting its weight on the other side of the camp. When she came out, she came and sat near me, close enough that I could have reached her. She didn't cry, or if she had, she'd finished before she came out. There was only a kind of settled weight to her. The way a person looks after something has been decided that there was no way to decide differently. I said, "I'm sorry." She nodded. One small dip of the head. We sat there while the light came, and the birds got louder, and the camp slowly woke around us. I didn't say anything more. I don't think she wanted words. I think she wanted a presence that wasn't asking anything of her, and that was something I could provide without any difficulty. After a while she said, "You've lost people." "Yes." "Who?" I thought about it. "A wife. 18 years ago. Fever." I paused. "A brother. The war." Another pause. "A partner. 8 years back. Ambush." She was quiet for a moment. Then, "What did you do after?" "Kept moving." "Did it help?" "It helped me stay busy." I considered what I was going to say next. "I'm not sure it helped." She nodded again, like that answer confirmed something. Then she got up and started doing the work of the morning, and I watched her, and thought about 18 years of keeping busy, and what it had and hadn't fixed. I told her I would be leaving the next day. We were outside after supper, the sun going orange and long across the plains, the cottonwoods throwing their last shadows over the creek. The pain in my back had settled to a deep ache that I could work around. My horse was ready. My gear was in order. There was no sensible reason to stay. She listened to me say this and then sat with it for a moment. "Where will you go?" she asked. "Montana, most likely. Man I know has been looking for riders for his outfit." She looked at the creek. "Montana. It's work," I said, and even as I said it, I heard how it sounded. Like a man making a case for something he wasn't entirely convinced of. She said, "I watched you, those days before the fight. The way you moved through this ground. The way you listened. You're not a man who was made for moving through, and then leaving." I didn't say anything to that right away, because I wasn't sure it was something I could argue with. I'd been made for moving through, and leaving in the sense that I'd done nothing else for 30 years. But whether that's the same as being made for it is a different question. "What would I stay for?" I asked. She turned and looked at me, and her expression was the most direct thing I had ever seen on a human face. "For the same reason you put your body between me and that bullet," she said. "Because you were already here." That stopped me cold. Because it was true. I hadn't thought about it. The way you don't think about a thing you've been carrying so long it's just part of your weight. I had moved toward her. Not toward Cutter's Crossing. Not toward the job. Not toward duty in any way I could calculate. I had seen those riders break toward the camp, and I had moved. And the reason I had moved was specific in a way that duty isn't. I said, "I'm a scarred-up old man with no permanent address, and a living made by being useful in the worst kind of situations." She said, "I know what you are." The way she said it, quiet, certain, no inflection of argument, landed in my chest like a coal from a fire. Not hot. Exactly. More like warmth that had been there a while, and I was just now feeling it. "You deserve something better than what I am," I said. I meant it. I was not performing modesty. She was quiet for a long moment. The creek made its sound. The light was nearly gone. "You shielded me with your body," she said. "You lay in my tent for 4 days, and did not once tell me how I should grieve, or what I should feel. When I needed silence, you gave me silence. When I needed a fire kept, you kept it." She paused. "You asked what I needed, and waited for the answer. Do you know how many men have ever done that? I didn't answer. Even scarred cowboys need love, she said. That is not a consolation. It is just true. I sat with that for a while. The first stars were appearing over the plains, that particular deep blue just after the last of the orange has gone, and the cottonwoods were dark shapes against it. I wouldn't know how to do this, I said finally. Stay somewhere. Be something to someone on a regular basis. I don't know if I remember how. I don't know either, she said. I have been a daughter, and then a caretaker, and then a widow, and now neither. I don't know what comes next. She looked at me. We would be figuring out at the same time. There was something about the plainness of that which got through every defense I'd spent 30 years building. Not a promise of ease. Not a promise of joy. Just, we would be figuring it out at the same time. Two people who'd been through enough to know what the real cost of things was, neither one pretending it would be simple. I said, I don't have anything. No land, no savings to speak of. The horses and the guns and what I've got on my person. I have a camp and people who need decisions made and a winter coming, she said. I am not looking for a man with a house. What are you looking for? She looked at me for a long moment. A man who stays, she said. I did not leave the next day. I told myself it was the wound, which wasn't fully wrong. But by the second day of not leaving, I'd stopped using that reason. Her camp needed things I could do. There were decisions to be made about where to winter. The creek bend they'd been using was exposed, and Jessup's outfit was broken but not gone. And there were other men like Jessup, always coming along the horizon. I knew this valley now. I knew the ground and the water and the 2 or 3 places where a camp could sit through a hard winter with reasonable protection. I rode out for 2 days and looked at each of them, and came back and told her what I'd found. And she listened, and asked questions that showed she'd been thinking about all the same things. And then she made decisions, and I watched her make them, and thought, this is what it looks like when a person was made to lead. I'll tell you what it looked like, specifically. Because it would be easy to say she was decisive, or she was wise, and leave it there. And that's not what I mean. What I mean is that she gathered the other voices. First, younger Bear, 2 elder women who hadn't said much in my presence, but whose opinions she clearly weighted. A younger man named Cut Arm, who knew this particular stretch of valley better than anyone. She let them all speak without cutting anyone off. She asked questions that sharpened what they were saying. And then she decided, clearly, without hedging, and moved on. No second guessing. No need for agreement once the decision was made. I'd ridden with men who led in the field for 30 years. Most of them were good at one kind of deciding, under fire, or in planning, or in managing people. Pick one. I had never seen one person who was good at all 3 the way she was. I kept that observation to myself, but she caught me looking at her once, after a particularly direct exchange with younger Bear about the water situation, and she said, "What?" "Nothing," I said. She narrowed her eyes in that way. She had that meant. She knew exactly what nothing meant. There was a man in the camp named Sitting Bull's cousin. His name was Younger Bear. But everyone called him that for reasons that were complicated and funny, and not mine to explain, who was not sure what to make of me at first. He watched me the way you watch something whose category you haven't settled yet. I let him watch. I did my work. I didn't press myself forward, or try to earn anything quickly. After about 5 days, he came and sat near me while I was repairing a piece of harness, and said, in English that was better than he usually let on, "She hasn't looked at a man since her husband." I kept working the leather. I know. Her husband was a good man. She'd only choose a good man, I said. He considered that. Then he picked up the other end of the harness and held it steady while I worked. That was the end of the conversation and the beginning of something else. The nights turned cold in early October. We were in the winter camp by then, in a bend of ground between 2 ridgelines that blocked the north wind and let in the morning sun. I had a tent of my own, set at a respectful distance, which was the right arrangement, and I kept it without needing to be told. The slow, earned way of things suited me. I had never been a man who rushed. She brought me supper one evening, which she'd done a few times before, and sat and ate with me. We talked about what needed doing before the first snow, Practical talk. Firewood. Feed for the horses. A section of her tent that needed restaking. When the food was done, she didn't leave right away. She said, "You've been quiet the last few days." "I'm generally quiet." "Different quiet," she said. I looked at the fire. "I've been thinking about what I'd have missed if that bullet had gone 3 inches to the right." She was still for a moment. Then she said, "What would you have missed?" I looked at her. The firelight was orange on one side of her face, and the other side was in shadow, and she was watching me with that directness that still, even now, made me feel like she could see everything. "This," I said. She held my gaze for a long moment. Then she reached out and put her hand against my face, the scarred side, the jaw that ran from ear to corner in a raised white seam, and held it there, her palm warm against the old wound. And she didn't say anything. She just looked at me, the same way she'd looked at me from the beginning, which was the way you look at something when you've already decided it has worth. I covered her hand with mine, and we stayed like that, the fire going between us and the night coming down cold around the camp. And I thought about all the years I'd spent being looked past, and the strange work of a life that had carried me to this particular fire at this particular age, and the way she was looking at me now. November. First snow came on a Thursday, which seemed like a pattern. Walked far, said Thursday was a reliable day for things to happen. I told her I'd started to notice that myself. The camp was ready. I'd worked alongside Younger Bear and 2 other men through October, and we'd put up enough wood and enough feed, and the tents were properly staked, and the water situation was solved. When the snow came, it came hard for 3 days, and then eased, and the camp held. There were things I was still learning. The language I picked up some, not enough. And Walks Far was patient about it in the same way she was patient about everything, which is to say, she corrected me without making it a lesson. I had a particular habit of mispronouncing the word for horse, in a way that apparently meant something else entirely, and made Younger Bear cough into his hand and look at the horizon. And when Walks Far finally told me what I'd been saying, I understood why. I practiced the right version for 3 days until she said it was acceptable. Her people's customs and protocols, which I navigated mostly by watching and being slower to act than I'd normally be, which wasn't natural to me, but I worked at it. There were ways of entering a space, and ways of not entering it. Ways of speaking across a fire, and ways of being quieter. And none of it was explained to me directly, because it didn't need to be to a man who was paying attention. A thing I'd learned a long time ago. If you want to understand how people live, watch what they do when they're not thinking about being watched. The history of grievances that shaped the way they moved through a country that had been contracting around them for decades, which was not mine to fix, and I was honest with myself about that. I was one man, and I had a particular kind of usefulness, and I knew its limits. I did not pretend to understand what they had come through. I did not explain it back to them. I did not offer opinions on things that were not mine to have opinions about. What I could do was be useful, and steady, and present, and I was all of those things. Cass, the young one from the hired 7, came through in late November, headed north. He stayed 3 days, and I could see him recalculating something, the way young men do when they see a life that doesn't match what they expected. On the second night, he said, "I didn't expect to find you here." "I didn't expect to be here," I said, which was true at the time of the bullet, and much less true now. He looked across the fire at Walks Far, who was talking with 2 of the women about something entirely unrelated to us. Then he looked back at me. "She's remarkable," he said. "Yes," I said. "Are you staying?" I thought about the Montana job, the man with the outfit, the work that would have looked like 30 other years of work. "Yes," I said. He nodded slowly, like a man putting something away in the right drawer. "Good," he said. "January is when you find out what things are made of." The cold came down in the second week and stayed. 20 below one night, and the horses were miserable, and the firewood went faster than we'd projected, and I made 2 hard rides through chest-deep drifts to a stand of dead timber I'd cataloged in October, specifically for a situation like this. The first ride, I was out 7 hours. The second, nearly 10. There is a particular kind of cold that gets into the chest and sits there like a stone, and by the second day of hauling timber, I could feel it working on me. That familiar warning that a man my age knows to listen to. I pushed through it because the alternative was a cold camp. And a cold camp in that country in January is a different kind of dangerous. I came back from the second ride and helped distribute what I'd brought, and then sat by the fire for a long time, not talking much, letting the cold work its way back out of me. Younger Bear brought me hot water without being asked. He set it down beside me and went back to what he was doing. That small thing, the not asking, the just doing, meant more to me than I showed. On the second of those rides, my horse went through ice on the creek, and we both went in, which is about as bad as it sounds. And I got us both out, and got myself dry and warm at Younger Bear's fire, because it was closer than mine, and he didn't say a word about it, just handed me dry clothes and moved over. When I got back to camp, Walks Far looked at me just once, a full look, from head to feet and back, and said, "I heard. We're fine." I said, "I know you're fine," she said. "You're here." She handed me a cup of something hot, and went back to what she was doing. But before she turned away, I saw it again, that look that she'd had since the second day at the well. That look that had me already measured and found to be something. I thought about the fact that there were maybe 60 people in that camp, and that over the course of this winter, I'd become the man they called on when something hard needed to be done. Not because I'd pushed for it, because I'd been there and capable and willing. Every time. And eventually, that's what you become. When the water in the creek froze solid for 4 days, and we needed to break ice for the horses every morning, I did that. When a section of a family's tent collapsed under snow weight at 2 in the morning, I heard it and was there with 2 other men before anyone else was fully awake. When the youngest child in the camp spiked a fever, and the women were treating him, and someone needed to ride to the nearest settlement for a specific thing they lacked, I rode through a day and a half of hard weather and got back in less than 2 days. None of it was heroic. It was just work that needed doing, and I did it. But I saw the way it registered. Not just with Walks Far, with all of them. The way you register a person who shows up, correctly, every time. It is a small thing to say and a large thing to earn, and I had not earned it by being impressive or by performing anything. I had earned it by being there, day after day, through cold and tedium and the small-grained difficulty of a hard winter in close company. I had never been that to anyone before. Not in 30 years. I'd been useful. I'd been skilled. I'd been hired and paid and trusted with lives, but always for the duration of the contract and no further. This was different. I turned the word over in my head like a stone, looking at it from different sides. This was belonging. February. One night, past midnight, when the camp was asleep, and only the sound of the wind against the tent, and the distant complaint of the horses in the cold, she came to my tent. She came in without any announcement, the way she did most things, and sat down, and we looked at each other in the low light of a fire that had gone to coals. She said, "I've been thinking about what I want." "What do you want?" I said, "I want you to stop keeping that respectful distance," she said, "because I've made my decision, and I made it a long time ago, and I'm tired of waiting for you to believe it." I looked at her for a moment. "I believe it," I said. "Then act like it," she said. "I will tell you this about what it is to be seen by a woman like that. Not a woman who loves you the way some women love, because you are useful, because you fill a necessary space, because the alternative is worse. But a woman who looked at you with your scars and your rough history, and your particular worn-down face and decided, of her own free will and clear eyes, that you were what she wanted. There is nothing in the world like that. If you have had it, you know. If you haven't, I don't know that I can explain it to you. It is the specific gravity of being known and wanted, anyway, not in spite of what you are, as what you are. I had spent 30 years moving through the world like a man who expected to be counted and then subtracted. You show up, you do the job, you leave before you cost anyone anything. You make yourself easy to move on from. You don't form attachments that'll slow you or complicate anyone's plans. You eat your supper and you sleep light, and you are out the door in the morning without anyone having to ask twice. I had gotten so good at that, over the years, that I'd stopped noticing it cost me anything. That's the thing about grief that comes in small daily doses. It doesn't feel like grief. It feels like practicality. It feels like clarity. You tell yourself, this is the life for a man like me. I am not built for the other kind. And you say it enough times that it settles into your bones like a fact of the world. She put an end to that. Not by softening me or changing me. By deciding that what I was, as it was already enough. More than enough. That the hardness in me was not a liability, but a quality that a man who'd lived long enough in difficult country to still be standing had something to give that a younger or easier man couldn't. She made me feel that. She didn't do it by telling me. She did it the way she did everything, with the steady, deliberate, unhurried weight of her conviction. By staying. By asking my opinion on hard decisions, and genuinely considering my answers. By trusting me with the people in her care. By pressing her hand to my face on a cold night and looking at me like I was already home. I want to be precise about one particular moment, because it's the one I come back to most often when I think about what changed in me that year. It was February. Maybe 3 weeks after she had come to my tent. We were in the middle of the day, both of us working. I was repairing a section of the horse pen, and she was on the other side of the camp, sorting through the stores, taking inventory with 2 other women. Ordinary work. Nothing happening. I looked up at some point for no reason, just one of those random lifts of the head, and she was looking at me from across the camp. Not because I'd called to her, or done something worth looking at. Just looking. And when my eyes met hers, she didn't look away and she didn't smile. Exactly. She just held my gaze for a moment in that way she had that meant. I see you. You're here. This is right. Then she went back to the stores. I held on to that for a long time. Just that. A woman who, in the middle of an ordinary day, looked across a camp at a scarred old gunfighter and found the view worth holding for a moment. Nobody had looked at me like that before. Not in a very long time. Maybe not ever. By pressing her hand to my face on a cold night and looking at me like I was already home. Spring came slow that year. March cold as February, April raw and windy. But by the first week of May, the plains were doing what they do, which is bloom so hard and fast, you almost can't believe a thing that hard and cold could turn into a thing that green. The grass came in almost overnight, and the horses went from thin and dull-coated to something closer to themselves within 2 weeks of good grazing. Spring in that country is a kind of argument that endurance is worth something, that the cold doesn't win, that whatever made it through has a right to be here. I had made it through. I was not the same man who had ridden into Cutter's Crossing the previous summer. I couldn't have told you exactly what was different, and I wasn't inclined to try. I just knew that I got up in the morning and there was something in the day I was moving toward, not just away from. That was new. Or not new old, maybe. Older than I could track. The camp moved to its summer ground. I moved with it. That detail was as simple, and as not simple, as it sounds. Younger Bear and I rode out one morning to look at a situation, 2 valleys over some dispute about water rights that Walks Far had been asked to send a representative to, and on the way back, with the sun coming down warm on the plains, and the grass coming green, and the horses walking easy, he said, "You'll winter with us again." "If I'm wanted," I said. He was quiet for a moment, in the considering way he had. "You're not a guest anymore," he said. "You know that." I rode with that for a while. The horses' hooves on the new grass made almost no sound. The sky was the particular blue it gets in May. Deep and distant, and without a cloud in it. "I know," I said. We rode on. The valley opened up below us, the creek threading through the cottonwoods, the summer camp already half assembled, smoke from the first fires, people moving. From up here it looked like a complete thing. Contained, alive, purposeful. I had spent 30 years riding down toward things, and keeping my attachment to them light, ready to ride away from them, which had protected me, and also meant I'd never seen a thing like this from above, and thought, that is mine to protect. That is mine, not owned. Belonged to. There is a difference, Younger Bear said. Without looking at me, she was alone a long time after her husband. "I know," I said. "He was a good man. He died hard." He was quiet for a moment. "She doesn't give herself easily." "No," I said. "She doesn't. So when she does, he said, still not looking at me. That means something. I looked at the back of his neck and the set of his shoulders. This man who had watched me all winter and taken my measure in his own time and arrived somewhere. I know, I said. And then, because it seemed like the right thing to say to a man who was telling me something important, I won't waste it. He nodded once. We rode down into the valley. There is one more thing I want to tell you. Sometime in May, I don't know the exact day, I was working outside, mending a fence line I'd put up around the horse ground. Hard, dull work, the kind I've always been good at. The kind nobody notices when it's done right. Sun on my back. The smell of the earth going soft. I heard her come up behind me. I knew her walk by then. There's nobody else with that particular rhythm. Unhurried and direct, covering ground without fuss. She stopped beside me and looked at the fence line. Good work, she said. It'll hold, I said. She was quiet for a moment. Then she put her hand on my back, between my shoulder blades, flat-palmed. In the same spot she'd pressed her hands when she was trying to stop a bullet from killing me. She kept it there. I'm glad you stayed, she said. I kept working. I didn't trust my voice right at that moment, so I let the work do the talking, which is a thing a man can do when a woman already understands him. After a while I set down the wire and turned, and she was right there, looking up at me with those clear eyes, and I put my hand against her face, her good whole face, and she turned into it like she'd been waiting for that exact thing. I'm glad too, I said. The planes went on in every direction. The horses moved easy in the pen. The camp was behind us and the summer was ahead, and I was a scarred, finished-looking old man standing in the morning sun with a woman who'd decided that what I was exactly enough. That's all there is to tell. That's all there ever needed to be.